Marea Neagră este o graniță filosofică între democrațiile, liberale și autocrații. Aceasta este una dintre concluziile fostului comandant al trupelor americane în Europa, generalul Ben Hodges. Discutăm astăzi despre necesitatea unei strategii de securitate la Marea Neagră care poate ajuta fiecare țară din regiune. În măsura în care toată lumea va respecta aceleași reguli și va avea interesele naționale protejate, aceasta pare să fie cea mai sigură cale de menținere a păcii pe termen lung, în punctul care face diferența dintre valorile vestului și cele rusești. Sunt Cristina Cileacu. Începe Pașaport Diplomatic. General Ben Hodges, former U.S. troop commander in Europe, welcome to Diplomatic Passport.
Christina, thank you for the privilege.
General, let's talk about the Black Sea region, which is always in a sort of competition between Russia and the West. Is it a mistake that till recently, till present, this area was not, let's say, in a center of attention?
Yeah, it's a huge mistake, and we're paying the price now. That we in the West, not just the United States, but I think most of Western Europe, did not fully appreciate the strategic significance of the Black Sea region as a bulwark against Iran and Islamic extremism, as a place where we needed to compete with Russia to prevent its use of the Black Sea for exporting violence in Syria and in Africa, but also for economic development. I mean, there's so much potential in the Black Sea region that is unrealized at this point, and I think we need to get busy on this.
Also, Europe's security is, let's say, being set up from this region, if we can say that, and Russia considers this region as its own, its sphere of influence, is not ready to give it up, and of course we see a lot of pressure from Russia. What a Black Sea security strategy should involve?
Well, you are correct, or I agree with you when you highlight the fact that for Russia the Black Sea is so important. In all of the various frozen conflicts, from the Caucasus, obviously Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Transnistria, Ukraine, all of this is in the Black Sea region on Russia's eastern and southern periphery. And of course, you can kind of extend that up around to include Belarus, which I think is going to be the real center of attention here over the next few weeks. So we should, of course, stand up. Our strategy should address diplomatic and legal issues, international water, respect for sovereign territory, borders, exclusive economic zones, etc. It should also emphasize economic development. I think Georgia, for example, should be developed as the gateway between Europe and Eurasia. And if that becomes true, then Romania would benefit significantly, because then the port of Constanta would become so busy and there would be so much pressure up the Danube River that it would lead to further development there. And of course this would also push for the more rapid development of rail and highway networks. So economic development would have far-reaching impacts for all in the Black Sea region. So a strategy would focus on that. But finally, would also focus on Turkey, that we have got to repair the relationship with our Turkish ally, because what makes the Black Sea special, of course, are the straits that connect the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And I think that we have allowed our relationship with Turkey to fall into disrepair. Fortunately, Romania has been a very important ally in terms of providing access and capability in the Black Sea region.
General Hodges, who is going to, let's say, start this discussion about the Black Sea strategy security? Which country?
Well, I think, of course, the countries of the Black Sea should be working very closely together to talk about trade, to talk about intelligence sharing, to talk about security cooperation, to talk about economic development, this east-west economic corridor from Romania to Georgia that would include Ukraine, of course. So there's a lot to be done internally. And to be honest, I think our allies and friends in the Black Sea region need to do a much better job of coordinating their voice in Washington and in Brussels to raise awareness of the strategic significance. But unfortunately, what happens is that most Black Sea nations tend to go alone in Washington and in Brussels. And so it doesn't have the same impact as if all the voices were together. And there's different reasons for this, but this is what I think. I think now, interestingly, because of the crisis in and around Ukraine, millions of more people are now aware of the Black Sea. Millions more people are hearing about Montreux. Millions more people are realizing what Russia is doing there. And so perhaps this is opportunity for Black Sea nations to highlight why they are strategically important to the United States, but also opportunity for the United States to recognize, right, this is not a problem that's going to solve itself. Russia will continue to do what it's doing over the long term, squeezing Ukraine, squeezing Georgia like a boa constrictor until Ukraine collapses. I think that's the aim. So the United States has got to take the lead here.
Diplomacy, of course, has to deal with this as well as military, but in case of diplomacy, in a negotiation, there are so many shades of gray, a lot of shades of gray. So what are the shades of gray in the Black Sea? What are the most difficult points to be negotiated when it comes to protecting everyone's interest in the Black Sea?
Well, first of all, the respect for international law and respect for sovereignty. Those are critical issues, and Russia routinely violates international law and shows disrespect for sovereignty with its use of force, the occupation of Crimea, obviously its support for the so-called separatists in Donbass in the Donbass, but also this frequent closing or use of large parts of the Black Sea region for live fire training exercises, for example. This shows an absolute total disrespect for Romania, for Ukraine, and other countries in the region, because they feel no pressure. There's no price to pay when they do that. So somehow, the nations of the Black Sea, including Turkey, have got to find a way to put pressure on Moscow to show more respect for international law. You know, Russia clearly has zero respect for Ukraine in Sea of Azov. And even though that's internal water, not international water, there is an agreement. And so finding ways to put pressure on the Kremlin to live up to international law and the agreements it signs is, I think, one of the biggest challenges we have. In the meanwhile, we have to figure out how do you get the initiative? Because right now we all react to whatever the Kremlin says or does. They are the ones setting the tempo. They are the ones choosing where to apply pressure. And instead, if you add together the population, the economic power, the military power, the diplomatic strength of all the nations of the EU and of NATO, plus partners, it dwarfs Russia. But it's our inability to work together on these things allows Russia to be dismissive of what we say. So this is where we've got to figure out how do we get the initiative. And I think that includes Turkey exerting more authority over the Turkish Straits. When Russia violates Montreux Convention or threatens other Black Sea countries, Turkey has the authority to do something about that. But they have to be confident that everybody else, the U.S., Europe, will protect them against Russian retribution.
Well, even Putin admits that the power of NATO is, of course, much more important than the military power of Russia. But then again, the West didn't do much when Putin illegally annexed Crimea. Was this another mistake of the West? Because we are aware of the fact that historically Russia responds to stronger answers.
You're exactly right. This was a mistake by us on our failure after they invaded Georgia to wake up and realize, to remember who we're dealing with. Instead, even after 2008, we continued to reduce our capability. The U.S. reduced its capability in Europe. The German Bundeswehr reduced its capability. The Netherlands reduced capability, and the UK pulled troops out of the continent. So.
But now they are back.
Yes, and that's the point. We're all having to come back now because we were naive in understanding how the Kremlin operates. I think one of the outcomes of this current crisis is going to be the exact opposite of what the Kremlin wanted, which is going to be a lot more NATO troops a lot closer to Russia. In fact, I believe, and I have to admit, I've changed my own thinking on this. I believe that we're going to see the development of permanent bases in places like Romania, Poland, Baltic countries, if those countries want it and agree to it and invite, then I could envision something that looks like permanent basing on NATO's eastern flank, because clearly our good faith effort to live up to the NATO-Russia Founding Act and not have permanent basing there did not pay off. It was an invitation to Russia. So now we're having to wake up and realize who we're dealing with.
But even in this current crisis, Vladimir Putin insists that his negotiation is with NATO and United States is not about Ukraine. He repeatedly says this thing. If NATO will develop its bases here, what will Vladimir Putin react?
Well, of course, there will be complaining and threats. So, I mean, this is not a simple decision to do that. We have to continue working together, and I am impressed, by the way, with what the Biden administration has done. It's a diplomatic effort. I have not seen us work so hard since 1995 in the Dayton Peace Accord. So we've stuck together. That will have to continue. Turkey, of course, has such an important role in any decision like this. So the possibility of holding the Kremlin accountable for what it's doing is only going to happen if the Kremlin sees all 30 nations together of the alliance working together, and that means diplomacy plays a critical role, but it has to be backed up by resolve and real capability. Now look, I'm 100% in favor of continuing dialogue with Russia, and I do not agree with the assessments that war is inevitable. It's certainly, all the pieces are in place to do something, but I think that Russia actually is more interested in the creation of the Union state with Belarus. They're using this whole situation to do that because they know that Europe will not cry when Lukashenko is gone. I'm not convinced that there will be a large, massive assault into Ukraine, partly because it's not feasible, and also I'm not sure that they need to do that if they can accomplish their aim of collapse of the Ukrainian government and collapse of the Ukrainian economy, using Russian forces, the army and navy, as a boa constrictor that squeezes Ukraine. And if it collapses, Ukraine's a failed state, could not join EU, could not join NATO, Putin gets what he wants, no invasion, no sanctions. So it's the pressure of all these troops. Now, you know, there are reports coming out today of Russia beginning to pull back some of their soldiers. We'll see. We remember last year, April last year, when Minister Shoigu said, exercise is over, the troops are all going back to the barracks, and of course they did not go back. So if there is actually a beginning of a withdrawal of some sort, this could be good news. But let's wait and see if they actually pull back, because what I imagine is that the pressure on Ukraine will continue, with the aim of wrecking Ukraine's economy still an objective for the Kremlin.
In this entire crisis, Ukraine path towards NATO looks, let's say, even further away than it already was. The same is the case of Georgia. So is NATO, of course, it's keeping its open door policies, but then again, is NATO on a long term, let's say, capable to attract much more countries to become members, or is better even for NATO to work with like-minded partners?
Well, I think it's been important that all of the allies stuck together on supporting the open door policy. That this is it's a principle not so that NATO can enlarge, but the principle of nations making their own sovereign choices, not having somebody else make choices for them. So I think this is an important principle, and I'm proud that the alliance has stuck together on this. Now, obviously, I think one day I know I would like to see Georgia and Ukraine become part of NATO, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So let's don't dwell on that. Keep the door open, protect the principle, but in the meanwhile, the United States should be working day and night with Ukraine and with Georgia to build up a normal bilateral relationship to help both of those countries continue their path towards liberal democracy, towards economic development, and being part of the security structure for the Black Sea region, which means you have to have a strategy for the Black Sea region. You know, the issue is not should they be a member, it's what do we want the region to look like? What's best for everybody's security and economic prosperity? That's got to be our focus.
And General Hodge, where is the place of Russia in this Black Sea strategy? Because Russia is also a country present in the Black Sea.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a fair statement that Russia's legitimate security concerns, of course, should be taken into consideration on anything. Otherwise, we just invite trouble forever. But I think that the security concerns that they talk about are way overstated, and in fact are not legitimate. I think what Russia really fears is having a Ukraine on its border that becomes prosperous and free, and then people in Russia start asking, why don't we have that?
What about us? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but look, Russia is a huge country. It's a great people. We need them to be a part of solutions for all of the major issues we're dealing with, whether it's climate, terrorism, Islamic extremism, and so many other issues. Finding a way where they are once again a responsible member of the global community. Now, that should be our aim.
The last question is about Turkey, because you mentioned it so much. Isn't Turkey much more interested in, let's say, its southern part? I'm talking about the Mediterranean Sea, of course, and less on the Black Sea?
Well, I think that's a very good question. You know, I spoke to a senior Turkish officer one time, and I said, "Sir, how are you doing?" And he said, "Ben, I wake up in the morning, I have Russia to the north, Iran, Iraq, Syria to the south, the Balkans to the west, and the Caucasus to the east. It's a hell of a neighborhood." And so, of course, probably Turkey would like to be able to be confident that its northern Black Sea interests were secure or at least not threatened, so that they can focus their attention on the very significant threats they have from terrorist organizations, whether it's the PKK and the YPG or ISIS to the south. And of course, Turkey is for the West, Turkey is the kind of the front line against Iran also, and Islamic extremism. So I think that Turkey's approach has generally been, don't rock the boat. Maintain status quo in the Black Sea, and we're going to focus to our south. And of course, Turkey's NATO ally Greece. This is always, you can't deny that there's always friction there, and the potential for something. Thank goodness for NATO. Otherwise, they probably would have been at war 2 or 3 times. I think any strategy for us has to put as a priority repairing the relationship with Turkey. It's got to be Turkey-USA 2.0, rebuild trust. And I don't excuse bad decisions by the Erdogan regime. I'm just saying we need to, it's too important to not fix it.
General Ben Hodges, thank you so much for this interview.
Cristina, thank you for the privilege.
Atât pentru astăzi, dar rămânem în continuare online pe pagina de Facebook a emisiunii și pe contul nostru de Twitter. Revenim cu subiecte noi din lumea diplomației și a politicii externe, vinerea viitoare de la 11:30 și reluare sâmbătă de la 22:30. La revedere!